In this Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree video, I'm going to be showing you my Pyromancer Perfumer build. This is a build that uses one of the new Perfume Bottle weapons. In this case, it's the Firespark Perfume Bottle. And I really wanted to show how awesome this weapon is in this build. I think this weapon is extremely underrated. You can get it very early on in the game, right in front of Talismans, where the perfumers are. It's in a chest there. You can grab it right away and start this build. So let's talk a little bit about this weapon. This weapon has dexterity scaling. It only scales with dexterity, has no requirements. So no matter what stats you have, you can use it. And it has B scaling and dexterity, which isn't bad. It has 100% fire damage, meaning that all the damage you do with this weapon is going to be fire, which is great. You can boost it with things like Fire Scorpion Charm or Fire Shroud and Cracked here very easily. Flame Grant Me Strength. All those buff the damage of this fantastically, so that makes it really easy to get high damage out of this weapon. So when it comes to the Ash of War, you're going to notice I'm using Quick Step or Bloodhound Step here. I use it defensively to create spacing to set up my charged heavy attacks, which I really like, and allows me also to sometimes get behind enemies and attack them from behind. But there is another option here as well if you don't like that. There's only like, maybe a handful or a couple of handfuls of Ashes of War that you can use on perfume bottles, but there are a couple that are unique to the DLC. And the one that I want to bring your attention to is called Rolling Sparks. This shoots out like a fire explosion kind of in a trail. It reminds me kind of like of a Rykard spell, if you will. And it does pretty good damage. It has a little bit better range than the charged heavy attack. It's not super expensive, but it's not super cheap at 14 FP. And you can use this reliably to set up before you, start charging up your heavy attack, so enemies kind of get staggered a little bit while you're charging up your heavy attack. It's not a bad option as well if you don't like Bloodhound Step or Quick Step. It's just that I find that I used my charged heavy attack more than this, and if you find that you're relying on this a lot, which is totally fine, you'll have to switch up your talismans and use something like Shard of Alexander instead of like the Blue Dancer Charm or something like that, and you might have to have a bit more mind, but it's really not a big deal, and if you like using it, definitely knock yourself out. And in case you're looking for this Ash of War, it's actually just located southeast of Shadowkeep in the camp there, where the Furnace Golem is rolling around. There's some perfumers up on a hill, and if you look above them, you'll see a flying scarab. If you knock it down and kill it, you'll get this Ash of War. So at first glance, this weapon might not see that good. When you see the one-handed attack animation of it, it doesn't look great. However, this is another paired weapon. There are a lot of paired weapons in the DLC, and when you're dual wielding it, you attack with both hands at the same time, kind of like in a cross pattern. And this gives you substantial damage and allows you to really crank out the damage. And I also really, really love the charged heavy attack with this weapon when you're two-handing or dual-wielding. It is absolutely outstanding. What it does is it twirls you in a circle and it shoots out fire in kind of like a 360-degree AoE. But what's great about this is the explosions are delayed. So as enemies are walking up to you, you can cast it early, and then when they walk into it, it'll detonate and get them. And it usually causes them to flinch, so you can charge up a second one anticipating that flinch, and then if the first one doesn't kill them, then the second one will, or it'll deal significant damage if it's a boss fight. And frankly, I use that attack in just about every fight that I can. And the range of the charged heavy attack is much, much further than you would think. So get in the habit of using that, because it is a fantastic thing to do, and it costs no FP at all, and it's just fantastic. And the jumping R2 attack with this weapon is also not bad. I find I use this a lot. It kind of does like a jumping cross attack with both hands hitting in a double slash kind of thing. And that does fantastic damage. So I like basically, the R1 attack chain is not bad. I like the charged heavy attack. I like the running R2 as well. The running R2 is absolutely phenomenal. And the jumping R2. Those are the things I like to use with this weapon while you're dual wielding. So beyond this, I also have a Sacred Seal in my offhand in order to buff with Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow. Flame Grant Me Strength is a natural buff that you want for this build because of the 100% fire damage that you do. So you absolutely want to have this. And if you're going to go up to 15 Faith to get it, you might as well go up another 10 Faith to get Golden Vow. Both of these things are extremely strong. This is probably not something you would do early on in the game if you just snag this weapon and we're doing like a first playthrough with it, because you could literally run into the DLC and grab it and run out without killing anything. Because you're probably 150 plus at this point, you will have the attribute points to pump Faith in order to get those two spells. So make sure you grab a Sacred Seal that weighs nothing here. And, it doesn't really matter whether you meet the requirements or not, because these spells' effectiveness do not change whether you meet the requirements of a seal or not. Just make sure it weighs 0. So for armor, I'm wearing 3 pieces of the Perfumer set and no legs in order to keep my equip load light and obviously give us that Perfumer appearance since we're kind of cosplaying here. Now, you might want to consider using medium armor of some kind if, you're having trouble staying alive, and obviously that will give you 51 poise as well, which will make it so you don't get interrupted when you're doing your charged heavy attacks and things like that. So that's another good reason to have that, better armor as well. I have the Fire Scorpion Charm to increase our fire damage. We do 100% fire damage with this weapon, so that's a no-brainer. We do take increased damage for that, which is why I have the Dragon Crest Shield Talisman, or Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, I should say, here to further increase our physical protection. We're also wearing very light armor, so, that's just really good to have in this case. And then I also have the Perfumer's Talisman, which increases our damage with perfume bottles. This does work with this weapon type. It was created in the base game, so they must have known they were going to make this or something like that, because it does apply here, which is great. So you're going to get more damage out of that, which is good. On your heavies, on your regular attacks, it's just going to boost your damage overall when using this weapon type. There are other good talismans for this build as well. If you like rolling sparks, Shard of Alexander is not a bad choice to further boost the damage there, especially if you went like the medium armor setup. You could replace Blue Dancer Charm with that. Or if you want to use the Axe Talisman to give you increased damage when you're using charged heavy attacks, you could use that instead if you find that you're using that more than something like rolling sparks. And lastly, I want to mention that I tested Millicent's Prothesis and Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, and they do not work with this weapon type. You will not build up attack power by attacking with this weapon and having those talismans equipped. The game does not consider these weapons, I think, melee attacks in that regard, so do not use those in a build using this weapon type. Attribute-wise for this build, I have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 25 Endurance, 8 Strength, 75 Dexterity, 16 Intelligence, 25 Faith, and 9 Arcane. You don't need any Intelligence or Arcane for this build. Again, started as an Astrologer, so I have way more here. So if you were playing a different class at the beginning of the game, you'd be a bit lower level. You'd probably be closer to 150 and still have a similar stat spread. Intelligence isn't doing anything for this build. 60 Vigor is because I'm wearing light armor. This makes it possible, in my opinion, to pull off this setup. If you're going to wear light armor in the DLC, which again, I recommend strongly against if you're just starting, make sure you have very high Vigor. We're talking 55 plus, probably, in order to not die from the hits, particularly if you don't have a lot of Erdtree fragments yet. I have 20 Mind here. I simply use Mind to buff with Golden Vow periodically and Flame grant me strength in boss fights, but otherwise I don't really buff much on the landscape unless I'm fighting like a difficult enemy, so I don't really need a lot of FP in general. Endurance-wise, I have 25 here. You can probably take this down a little bit even. I don't really have stamina problems with this build because I use charged heavy attacks so much. But, you might want to use a medium-ish heavy armor in order to, medium roll if you're not going the Blue Dancer route. So 25 is probably pretty good. You don't need any strength for this build, which is why mine is 8. I have 75 dexterity here. Probably take this up to 80 soon. If I wasn't, those points were in intelligence, they'd probably go into dexterity here. So to give us some more damage, but after 80 it significantly drops off. However, because the only damage you can get out of this weapon is to continue in dexterity, you'll probably take this up to 99 at some point just to get max damage out of it. And of course, Faith is at 25 for Flame grant me strength and Golden Vow. So for Flask of Wonders Physique, we obviously have the Flame Shroud and Crack tier to increase our fire damage. Because we do 100% fire damage, we get so much effect out of this. If you're playing like a lower level version of this build, you might want to use Dexterity also in order to increase your damage with the weapon. You could do it here as well to get a little bit more damage. It's not going to be that much, but you could, or you could use like Stamina Recovery, or you could use the one that increases the damage of your charged heavy attacks, which is, a good choice as well because you're going to use those a lot during boss fights. And then if you're talking about Great Runes for this build, you're using essentially 5 out of the 8 stats. So you could use Godric's. That's not a bad choice. It's kind of probably on the borderline. Radon's is also not bad for health, stamina, and FP, or simply using Morgoth's Great Rune as well might not be bad for the extra HP, especially if you're going the light route. That will help keep you alive during, some fights that are more difficult for sure. So that wraps up my Pyromancer Perfumer build. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. This is a slept-on weapon, I think. I don't think too many people realize how good the perfume bottles are going to be. I haven't tested them all out yet, but I think they're all going to be absolutely outstanding. I love the moveset. I love the damage that they do. They're absolutely fantastic weapon, and I had tons of fun playing with it. So highly, highly recommend this one out if you're looking for, a little bit more refreshing style of play they haven't seen before in Elden Ring. As always, if you have questions about the build or you have other tips that maybe I didn't mention, make sure to leave them in the comments below, and I will try and respond to them as soon as I can. How are you guys enjoying Shadow of the Erdtree? For those of you playing, what build would you like to see next? You can also let me know this in the comments.